Let me tell you all something. Every now and then, the world gives us a moment that makes everybody stop what they're doing, raise an eyebrow and go, now hold on. What in the world is this about? And when that moment involves India, the United States, and two of the most talked about political personalities on the planet, oh, you know folks are gonna talk. The news cycles light up, the analysts get busy, Twitter goes wild, and suddenly everybody from your neighbor's cousin to the man selling tea at the street corner has an opinion. Because when someone says the Prime Minister of India turned down an invitation from a former U.S. president, it ain't just a news story anymore, it becomes some kind of international barbershop conversation everybody wants in on. And I know why. It's because the second people heard about it, they started whispering like something was hiding under the surface. Why'd he decline? What's the real reason? Is this a message? Is the relationship between India and the U.S. changing? Human beings love two things, mystery and drama. If you give folks a mystery with international consequences, oh, they're gonna run with it like it's the Olympics. But before we get lost in that swirl of big headlines, conspiracy theories, armchair experts, and political gossip, let's break it down like people do when they're sitting at home sipping their evening tea. Because let's be honest, politicians can make simple things sound complicated, and regular people can make complicated things sound dramatic, but somewhere in between all that is the truth. Now, when the Prime Minister of India declines an invitation from a big American political figure, folks start assuming it must be one of two things. Either there's some super-secret message coded into that refusal, or something fundamental is shifting under the ground of India, U.S. ties, and depending on who you ask, they'll swear they know which one it is. But the reality is usually not as shiny and scandalous as the headline makes it look. Sometimes people read too much into things. Sometimes people don't read enough. And sometimes there's something important happening, but the folks shouting about it the loudest are the same ones who understand it the least. Now let's imagine the moment for a second. The invitation goes out. It's fancy, diplomatic, polished the whole 9 yards, and the world watches for what the Indian Prime Minister is gonna do. And when the response comes back as a no, woo boy, you'd think someone dropped a plate in the middle of a quiet restaurant. Folks freeze midair. Every news anchor sits up straight. Headlines get typed faster than popcorn popping. And the first reaction from people is always the same. Is this personal? And I want to pause right there, because that's how the world works now. Everything has to be personal. Somebody says no to a meeting, and suddenly it's a feud. Somebody cancels lunch plans, and here come 50 theories about how they're secretly fighting. You can't even decline a phone call these days without someone assuming you're plotting a revolution. But political diplomacy ain't the same thing as two neighbors arguing over who stepped on whose lawn. It's like chess, big, complicated, strategic chess where every move has layers to it. And when India makes a move on the world stage, you better believe it has calculation behind it. People don't run a country of 4 billion people by making impulsive emotional decisions. You can't even run a family of 4 like that. Ask anybody with kids, those little people have strategy meetings behind your back. But let's get into the heart of what's really driving all this curiosity. It's because India and the U.S. have one of the most interesting, dynamic, constantly evolving relationships on the planet. Some days they look like best friends sharing secrets. Other days they look like co-workers who like each other but need a moment alone. And both sides know they need each other economically, strategically, technologically, diplomatically, the whole deal. It's a partnership that has grown, changed, stretched, and sometimes gotten a little tense, but it's always moved forward. So now, when India's Prime Minister declines an invite, Folks begin projecting all kinds of deep meanings onto it like it's some political horoscope. They start saying things like, this must mean India is sending a signal, or India's charting a new path, or this is a shift, a pivot, a realignment. And sometimes people even start weaving together old events, new rumors, half-remembered articles, and a sprinkle of wishful thinking, like political masala chai. But let me slow this down and really get into it, because if you look past the headlines, past the gossip, past the political fan clubs on both sides, something interesting does start to take shape. India is playing a long game. And when a country is playing a long game, every public move becomes a performance, every decline becomes a statement, and every handshake becomes a symbol. Even silence can make people talk. That's the nature of global politics. You don't have to announce something for it to mean something. Now people asked, is there a hidden message here? And the funniest thing is, even if there was one, it wouldn't be written on a billboard. Diplomacy is the art of saying things without saying them. Sometimes a no means no. Sometimes a no means not right now. Sometimes a no means I hear you but I'm busy. And sometimes it means we're still friends but this ain't the moment. And sometimes a no is just a no. And the only hidden message is that grown people can't be everywhere at once. But you know how folks are. They want layers. They want intrigue. They want drama. It's like the world wants politics to be a reality show. And when they don't get enough drama in the real story, don't worry, they'll create it themselves. Let's look at what's really happening behind all that noise. India, right now, is operating in a world where every major global power wants a seat at its table. You got America wanting partnership, Russia still hanging around from old times, Europe trying to keep up, China trying to intimidate, and every medium-sized nation trying to figure out if India is the next big leader to attach themselves to. This ain't 20 years ago. India isn't the quiet kid in the back of the global classroom anymore, it's the one everybody's watching. So when India makes any move, even something as simple as declining an invite, people start reading it like they're decoding ancient scriptures. And the reason is simple. India's decisions matter now more than ever. See, what people don't understand is that India has been doing something very deliberate these past several years. It's been shifting from reactive diplomacy to proactive diplomacy. Instead of reacting to global events, India is positioning itself to shape them. Instead of choosing sides, India is building its own orbit. Instead of allowing other countries to define its role, India is defining its own. Which brings us back to that declined invitation. Because whether people want to admit it or not, that no was not just a calendar conflict or a polite refusal, it was India asserting its autonomy, its independence, its ability to say yes or no based purely on what aligns with its national interests, not anybody else's expectations. But is this refusal a sign of distancing, a break, a shift, a new chapter? Well, hold on, because the answer is more complicated than a simple yes or no. India-U.S. ties are like two giant continents drifting closer and closer together, but not always in a straight line. Some days the partnership feels warm, supportive, aligned. Other days it gets prickly because both countries have big personalities, big ambitions, and big opinions about how the world should work. But here's the truth that people tend to miss when they're rushing to conclusions. Relationships between nations don't change because of one meeting declined or one invitation not accepted. They evolve because of long-term patterns, shifts in policies, shifts in priorities, shifts in the global environment. India and the U.S. share too many interests for one single incident to rewrite the whole story. Technology partnerships, economic cooperation, defense alliances, strategic balancing in Asia, these are not small things. These are anchors, and anchors don't drift just because the surface water gets choppy. But here's where things get interesting. India is making one thing crystal clear. It is not going to be seen as a sidekick to anyone, not as a junior partner, not as a backup dancer in someone else's show. India wants and deserves a seat at the center of the global stage. And to get that, it has to show the world that its decisions are independent, consistent, principled, and strategic, not influenced by individual personalities or political friendships. And anyone who's been paying attention can see that India is investing heavily in this idea of multi-alignment. Not non-alignment like the Cold War, multi-alignment, a world where India can work with multiple power centers at once without being tied down to any one of them. That's the new Indian foreign policy. So declining an invitation might simply be India saying, we deal with nations, not individuals, policies, not personalities, institutions, not emotions. And that right there is a message. Not a dramatic one, not a hostile one, not a hidden one, a mature one. But I know some people out there want a little more spice. So let's dig deeper because there is another layer to this. And that layer is the simple fact that India doesn't want to get dragged into America's internal political battles. Whenever the U.S. enters election season, everything becomes a tug-of war. Every international appearance, every handshake, every smiling photo gets interpreted as endorsement. And India does not want to be seen as picking sides. Not again. Not ever. India learned a long time ago that when it comes to American politics, the smartest thing to do is stay friendly with whoever wins and not get tangled up with who's running. So when the Prime Minister steps back from political invitations in the U.S., it's not a snub, it's not disrespect, it's self-preservation, it's long-term strategy. It's India saying, we're gonna be friends no matter who's in charge, so don't pull us into your family arguments. That's wisdom. And you can bet every major country watches India's moves with a magnifying glass now. Because India has something rare, the ability to speak to both sides of the world's dividing lines. When India says yes, it matters. When India says no, it matters, and when India says nothing, oh, that might matter the most. But let's not forget the human side of all this. Politicians are still people. They have schedules, priorities, calculations, pressures, responsibilities. Sometimes a decline happens simply because a leader's plate is full enough to feed 10 countries. Running a nation the size of India, you ain't got free afternoons. Your free time doesn't even have free time. So while the world is busy spinning narratives, the truth might be as boring as, he had other commitments. But does that stop people from talking? Absolutely not, and maybe that's a good thing. Because conversations like these force people to pay attention to the bigger picture, to realize that global politics is not a circus of personalities, but a network of interests. Countries don't rise or fall based on who shook whose hand. They rise or fall based on vision, strategy, policy, leadership, and the ability to adapt to a changing world. And India right now is adapting better than most. So let's bring this home. Is this a hidden message? Maybe. Is it a diplomatic shift? In some ways, yes, but not the kind people assume. It's not a shift away from the U.S. It's a shift toward India's own center of gravity. India is no longer positioning itself around other countries. It's making others position themselves around India. This moment wasn't about rejecting a person, it was about asserting a principle. India will engage, cooperate, collaborate, and build partnerships, but it won't be pulled or pushed according to someone else's political timeline. That is not weakness, that is confidence. That is not distance. That is balance. That is not hostility. That is maturity. And let me tell you something, the world respects that. Even when they pretend not to. Even when they fuss about it in public. even when the headlines turn it into drama. Deep down, every major nation understands exactly what India is doing, stepping into its role as a global power that moves on its own terms. So, the next time you hear somebody say, "Why'd India decline that invitation? What does it mean?" you tell them this: it means India is no longer following anyone's script. It is writing its own. And whether people like it or not, whether they approve or not, whether they understand it or not, India will keep doing what's best for India. Because when a nation knows its worth, knows its direction, and knows its power, it doesn't chase invitations, it chooses them. And that, my friends, is the real story. The decline signals that India seeks predictable, policy-level engagement rather than symbolic appearances. And this idea opens up an entire world of understanding about how India is reshaping its foreign policy posture in a global environment defined by uncertainty, shifting power balances, and increasingly personality-driven politics. When a country grows from being an observer to being a central participant in global affairs, it begins to treat international invitations, meetings, and appearances not as moments for spectacle, but as moments for strategy. So when India declines an invitation from a high-profile figure, the message is not rooted in emotion or personal distance. It is rooted in the desire for relationships to be built on durable frameworks instead of fleeting theatrics. And that desire reflects how far India has come in the architecture of global diplomacy. It is no longer a country trying to get noticed. It is a country ensuring that the world engages with it correctly, consistently, and with respect for its long-term priorities. This deliberate pull toward policy-level engagement signals maturity. Symbolic gestures may create noise, but predictable mechanisms create progress. When a leader attends an event primarily designed for optics, the world sees a photograph, but when a country invests in policy-driven mechanisms, the world experiences results. India seeks results, not applause. That shift becomes especially important at a time when international politics is increasingly driven by personalities who bring with them waves of supporters, critics, media narratives, and speculations. India prefers not to be entangled in those waves because symbolism is often temporary, and temporary moments do not build stable partnerships. A stable partnership is built when two nations establish recurring dialogues, structured cooperation, and long-term agreements that outlast leaders, elections, and dramatic headlines. So, the decision to decline is not a rejection. It is a prioritization of meaningful engagement over symbolic participation. India's strategic community has long believed that nation-to-nation relations must not be dependent on individuals, political cycles, or shifts in domestic power within partner countries. Relying too much on personalities creates fragility. If the relationship becomes too closely tied to one leader, what happens when that leader is replaced? Does the relationship crumble? Does it pause? Does it get renegotiated? These questions can cause unpredictability. India prefers a model in which relationships stay stable, regardless of which leader occupies office in another country. That stability requires the building of institutional channels, formal processes, predictable dialogues, and clear expectations. It is not glamorous. It does not produce viral images, but it builds the kind of durability that shapes geopolitical influence for decades. And India knows that durable influence matters more than momentary attention. In the modern world, symbolic appearances often mask deeper issues. A warm public gesture does not guarantee policy alignment. A handshake on a stage does not guarantee long-term cooperation. A photograph of two leaders smiling does not ensure that their officials will translate that moment into actual agreements. India has learned, through multiple historical experiences, that symbolic friendships can fade quickly, but policy frameworks endure. And this is why India is increasingly selective about where it puts its time and diplomatic presence. If the interaction is structured around policy, strategy, or measurable outcomes, India is present, prepared, and invested. But if the interaction is designed merely to showcase proximity or create public narratives, India chooses caution. Taking that cautious approach ensures that no misinterpretation, misrepresentation, or sensationalism distorts India's actual diplomatic intentions. Declining an invitation can also act as a protective measure. In an age where political optics travel faster than facts, a single public appearance can be twisted into interpretations that may not align with reality. When high-profile individuals invite world leaders to events, the appearances often get portrayed as endorsements even when they are not. India does not want to be perceived as endorsing any political figure in a nation where leaders change and political environments shift rapidly. This caution is especially relevant to India's relationship with the United States, where political polarization is intense and narratives shift quickly. By choosing predictable, policy-oriented engagements, India protects its neutrality and ensures that its presence is never misused or mistaken for political favoritism. Predictability in diplomacy creates trust. When countries know that India engages based on policy, not personality, they understand that India is consistent. Consistency is a powerful currency in global politics. A nation perceived as unpredictable will struggle to build deep, lasting international partnerships. A nation perceived as consistent becomes a reliable anchor. India wants to be that anchor. And the anchor is built not through symbolic appearances, but through structured bilateral talks, strategic dialogues, defense agreements, technology partnerships, economic frameworks, and regular diplomatic consultations. These instruments are the backbone of modern diplomacy, and India is investing heavily in all of them. Declining an invitation shows that India chooses to channel its diplomatic time and energy into these serious, structured engagements rather than appearances designed for show. Another layer of this diplomatic strategy involves India's evolving identity as a global power. When a country is rising, others often try to pull it into their own political or strategic orbit. Invitations, gestures, summits, and events can sometimes be tools to build narratives about closeness. By declining symbolic appearances, India asserts that it will not be used as a prop in someone else's political story. India is writing its own story, and every international engagement must align with that script. The desire for predictable engagement means India wants every diplomatic step to contribute to a clear strategic trajectory. No distractions, no noise, no detours. This emphasis on policy-based interaction also fits with India's philosophy of multi-alignment. Multi-alignment means India works with multiple power centers simultaneously rather than aligning with only one. To maintain this balance, India must avoid actions that create the appearance of leaning too closely toward any one leader or faction. Symbolic appearances can break that balance because they can be interpreted as favoritism. Policy engagement preserves balance because it is grounded in formal structures that apply regardless of political changes. That is why India invests so heavily in frameworks like strategic dialogues, defense agreements, trade negotiations, and technology partnerships. These frameworks give India room to maneuver. Symbolic appearances restrict that room. Predictability also helps reduce misunderstandings. Diplomacy is delicate, and misinterpretations can cause unnecessary tension. A single symbolic gesture might lead one nation to assume deeper intimacy than actually exists, or another nation might view the same gesture as a shift in allegiance. Policy-level engagement removes ambiguity. Policies are concrete. Policies are documented. Policies cannot be spun the same way a picture or public appearance can. Policy-driven diplomacy ensures that both sides know exactly what they are committing to and what expectations they share. India's decision to operate at a policy level reflects its awareness of how global narratives are constructed. Media outlets often amplify personalities, not policies. Public appearances often overshadow substantive meetings. But India does not want optics to overshadow outcomes. India wants a relationship based on what the two countries actually do together, not how they appear together. This approach also protects India from domestic backlash. Symbolic appearances with controversial figures can trigger debates within India that detract from strategic objectives. Policy-level engagement, by contrast, is less politically sensitive and more grounded in national interest. Furthermore, symbolic appearances can sometimes be tied to time-sensitive political cycles. While politicians change, nations endure. India wants relationships grounded in the enduring, not the temporary. When engagements are policy-driven, they survive leadership transitions. Agreements signed between ministries, departments, and institutions continue regardless of who becomes president or prime minister. Symbolic appearances tied to individual leaders do not provide that continuity. India wants continuity. Continuity ensures stability. Stability strengthens a nation's global influence. India also knows that over-reliance on symbolic appearances weakens the negotiating position of smaller or emerging countries, because symbolism often makes them appear eager or dependent. India wants to be seen as a confident, self-sufficient global actor that engages on equal terms with all partners. Saying no to symbolic invitations reinforces that image. It signals that India does not attend events for validation or visibility. It attends events that advance its strategic interests, and that sends a subtle but powerful message. India is to be taken seriously. The decline also reflects India's understanding that modern diplomacy is a marathon, not a sprint. Symbolic appearances create quick bursts of attention, but policy frameworks create long-term benefits. India is investing for decades into the future. That future includes new technology partnerships, expanded defense capabilities, enhanced trade routes, deeper cultural exchange, and stronger global institutions. These goals require patient, consistent engagement. They require predictability. Symbolism cannot provide that. India's approach also acknowledges that global politics is becoming increasingly transactional. Nations seek benefits, not gestures. Symbolic invitations rarely bring tangible benefits. Policy-driven engagement does. India wants to spend its diplomatic capital on engagements that produce technological collaboration, market access, defense cooperation, economic investments, and multilateral influence. These gains cannot be achieved through symbolic events. They require negotiation, planning, and sustained interaction at institutional levels. So when India chooses policy over symbolism, it is choosing substance over spectacle. It also demonstrates that India is highly conscious of the geopolitical risks of being misinterpreted. A symbolic appearance with a controversial or polarizing figure could be used by rivals to claim that India is taking sides. It could also be used by domestic critics to argue that India is aligning with a political faction abroad. India avoids these risks by sticking to formal, predictable interactions that are clearly tied to national interest. The decline of an invitation can thus be seen as a strategic shield, a way of avoiding unnecessary political entanglements that bring no long-term benefit. India's desire for predictable engagement is also tied to its confidence in its own diplomatic stature. Countries that feel insecure often rely on symbolic gestures to project influence. Rising powers rely on structured engagement. India does not need symbolic events to prove its importance. The world already treats India as a key global player. India has one of the world's largest economies, one of the strongest militaries, a massive diaspora, and a unique geopolitical position. Symbolic appearances would do little to enhance this global standing. Policy-level engagement, however, shapes how India will be positioned for decades. This approach also strengthens India's ability to engage with all sides during conflict or crisis. Countries that choose symbolic alliances lose flexibility. Countries that choose policy alignment retain maneuverability. For example, if India publicly aligns too closely with one political figure, its ability to work with that figure's opponents becomes weak. India cannot afford that weakness. India must maintain working relationships with all political forces in major global powers. Policy engagement achieves that, symbolic engagement undermines it. India's decision also reflects a broader shift happening globally: the decline of personality-driven diplomacy and the rise of institutional diplomacy. Leaders come and go, but institutions remain. India prefers institutions. Institutions ensure stability, even in volatile international environments. Declining the invitation communicates that India wants its relationship with the United States and with other major partners to be grounded in governmental institutions, diplomatic channels, and strategic frameworks, not in the personal dynamics between individual leaders. This priority becomes especially important for a country with a foreign policy doctrine rooted in sovereignty and autonomy. Symbolic appearances can sometimes give the illusion of alignment that is deeper than what actually exists. India avoids such illusions because illusions create expectations. Expectations create pressure. Pressure creates unnecessary complications. Policy-level engagement avoids these complications by keeping relationships clear, defined, and focused on substance. Ultimately, India's decision to prioritize predictable, policy-driven engagement reflects its determination to shape the future of global diplomacy on its own terms. It shows that India is not interested in playing supporting roles in the political narratives of other nations. It wants relationships that are steady, structured, and centered on shared interests, not appearances. And by making decisions with this clarity and confidence, India demonstrates that its foreign policy vision is long-term, self-assured, and deeply strategic.